I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on February 22nd, 2019. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you, a little bit different than in the past. It's actually embedded on the YouTube window. So you see chat will either be right of the window or down below it. 3 little buttons. You can pop that out and put it anywhere on your screen. Works really well via mobile. As well, if you want to try it that way, you can put those questions in chat. If you have questions after the fact, maybe you're watching the recorded version of this, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. And don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaches, resources, and training needs. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening. We call that podcasting. All the cool kids are doing it. You want to do it too. Head over to coaching.gallup.com and click on the resources tab and all the links that you need to do that on any platform available for you there. Dean Jones is our host today. Dean's the principal architect of Gallup's global client learning strategy. And Dean, it's always great to have you on Called to Coach. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
We are going to spend a little bit of time. We're going to spend some time in 2019 for sure. But today we're going to spend some time talking about the manager and the importance of the manager and the role that it kind of plays in organizations. And so why don't you spend some time? Why don't you kind of kick us off? Why is this important? Why are we talking about it now? Kind of lead us into that discussion.
So here's what I thought we'd do today is we talk a lot. As you said, Jim, our intent this year is you're going to see us focus a lot on managers this year. And one of the things I was thinking about our conversation today, and part of what I wanted to be able to accomplish today is to kind of bring everybody into the world of managers. Jim and I were kind of laughing prior to the call today, or before the webcast today. We were talking about, like for some people, their only experience of management is the managers they've had. And if you had a great manager, that's life-changing. If you've had a string of bad managers, and believe me, there's a lot of them out there, your experience of management isn't necessarily super great, right? I will tell you what, you could tell this because you talk to a lot of people who have management and supervision collapsed. Right? So they think that the role of a manager is to watch over you and make sure you comply with stuff. Right? They don't even have management kind of collapse from supervision. Right? So I wanted to start to talk today as specifically for you all as strengths coaches. I wanted to talk about the importance of managers for organizations. And specifically what I want to start to get into is how you as strengths coaches can be helping managers develop. And by extension, improving and transforming the culture of the companies that you're working with. So as you focus inside of an organization, as you go to impact organizations, your work with managers is probably some of the most significant work that you'll do with organizations. And investing in their development, investing in their growth and their success. That is actually the fast lane to having an impact on organizations and the culture of organizations. So it's no secret that we at Gallup have thought managers are important. We've been talking about the significance of managers since first break all the rules. So, this has been around for a long, long time. We think that managers are important and have made no secret of it. One of the things that we're doing, and you'll see in our new book, in May, we're releasing this book, It's the Manager. And one of the things we can do is make available, if you haven't already gone to the page on our site, we're releasing, there's a section of the book that you can get early. We're releasing information about what the book's about. The book provides world-class advice and insights for leaders and managers at all levels in the organization about the role and the impact of management. And it includes everything from culture to employment brand to moving from being a boss to being a coach to the future of work. It's very sweeping in its scope. There's 52 short chapters that are included in it. Incredibly powerful. So we're super excited, obviously, about this book, right? And as part of that, I think it brings us into the world of managers, and specifically given that kind of my focus and my interest and my expertise is in learning, I wanted to talk about how learning is an integral part of what great managers provide, how it's really the focus of their work and what they do. One of the things you'll see if you are familiar at all with our performance management work that we've done over the course of the last couple of years, a lot of that is what you notice is has a very developmental spin to it. And in fact, the way we talk about performance management is we coined the term performance development. And it's really about how are you developing people so that they can actually accomplish what they're expected to accomplish and what they'd like to accomplish in their roles, right? So I want to talk about that today. Okay.
Dean, can I start with a question? And Ralph had asked this in the Facebook group before we even started. There's been some talk that that some work groups may not even need managers, like they're able to work without them. And what is the importance? I mean, why do we need managers? Or do we need them? So can you that's kind of a trendy topic right now. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, it's so funny because the managerless teams have been around for literally decades, right? The latest thing I'm looking at the latest here. I'm picking books off my bookshelf, right? So the latest hip version of it was this book, Holacracy. I'm holding up books and then I'm going to bash them, okay? But this was the thing at Zappos, right? The gentleman who was working with Zappos, who said, "Hey, organizations are more like cities, and you know what I mean. And it's sort of like we're all like this tribe, and we don't need managers or leaders, right?" Here's the thing I will tell you is if you've ever had a great manager, you know the difference that managers make, right? There's a simple statistic that we quote a lot that I think captures that is that 70% of engagement on the job, right, can be a direct engagement can be directly attributed, or work group engagement can be directly attributed to the manager, right? So one of the things we see in organizations is managers actually have a disproportionate impact on engagement and the culture of the organization, and so the culture of the work group. And so we know that that's significantly important. So to your point, Jim, they have this kind of central role, but I think because so many people have experienced bad management that for some people it's hard to distinguish from what good management is, right? So I'm going to take a step back and kind of get a running start at this. I want to talk a little bit about how the workforce is changing. So I want to take a step back and kind of talk about this a little bit, just because I think it's important context as you think about the role of the manager, and particularly the role of manager relative to development. Right. So what we know is the workforce has been changing, right? The workforce is changing. It's been changing now for a number of years, and that millennials have driven much of that change. So as millennials entered the workforce, it started to actually reshape the workforce. And you all know over the last few years, it felt like as millennials became a more significant component of the workforce. It was funny because I was last night I was looking back at some articles that were written around that time and some research reports that were written around that time. And the thing that is sort of funny and ironic is, there's a lot of articles that were like, "Hey, these people confuse us." It's like, how do we make sense of this? Who are these people, right? It's like, it felt like for millennials, they felt sort of as a generation, sort of felt different than some of the prior generations. And so we know that millennials are the generation that was born between 1980 and 1996. A couple of years ago, they were roughly speaking about 38% of the U.S. workforce. And as they continue to enter the workforce and as they tend to grow, I think there's a perception, I think, that we think millennials are young. Like if you do the math, right? Like the first millennials are going to turn 40 next year, right? So these are not necessarily young people, right? This is and they make this disproportionate percentage of the workforce. And part of what was interesting about them is they behave differently than other generations. So there's like we've studied, if you're interested, we've got this great millennial report you can read. I'm not going to go through everything, but They're more connected. So they're more adept with technology. They're more connected. They're more highly educated. I think that was a function of the jobs that, as they moved into the workforce, the jobs that were available. And for a lot of them, just going back to school was a great choice. They're more likely to change jobs frequently. I think that's something that everybody who works around millennials in organizations talks about. They're more ethnically and racially diverse as a generation, and they're more likely to value diversity and inclusiveness, right? I think it's one of the cool, exciting things that they've brought is that value of diversity and inclusiveness. They're less likely to be affiliated. They're less likely to be a registered voter. They're less likely to be affiliated with an organized religion. So there's lots of pieces of it, right? The thing that is interesting, though, is when you think about what millennials want inside their organization, in a lot of ways, what they've done, it feels like they're different, but in a lot of ways, what they've done is they've given voice to many of the things that all generations want. Right? It's funny. I can't even tell you the number of times when I've been with groups and I've talked about. For some of you, you've seen that slide that we show a lot of the times, where we talk about the shift in the workforce. Or in the workplace that's been driven by millennials, and I'll have somebody say, "Look, I'm a baby boomer and I want that stuff too," right? And I think that it's one of those things where they've really given voice to what many generations have wanted from the workplace, right? But I think they've, in some ways, been more vocal and more successful in being able to say, "Hey, look, we want to reshape the workplace in a way that really works for people," right? They want a good job where they can be fully engaged in their work. That's something not only millennials want, but everybody wants, right? They want their work to be meaningful. They want work that has a purpose and fulfills their sense of mission. And purpose is super important. I will tell you, one of the things that you see with millennials, and honestly with all people, and it's a component really of great management, is helping people understand how their work connects, how their work has a purpose and connects with the mission of the organization. They want to be in an environment that focuses on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. They are not alone in that. So, and that's why we have a global strengths movement, right? But most of all, and this is really interesting, millennials want to be in an environment that is characterized by development, where they have opportunities to learn and grow. And you really see it's like when you survey millennials about that particular one. 59% of millennials report that the opportunity to learn and grow is extremely important to them when applying for a job. We did some work with a client here where the client was convinced at the time that as they were recruiting candidates, that they should be recruiting based on the lucrative compensation and the great benefits package that they were offering. And in fact, what we found was, that for the top candidates, that was not very interesting. That in fact, for the top candidates, the thing that was most interesting for them were having opportunities to learn and grow. That they knew that given their talent, given their track record, they were going to end up with the right kind of compensation and benefits. What they didn't know, the unanswered question in the recruitment process was, hey, is this going to be an organization where I'm going to get developed as a person, where I'm going to get developed professionally and personally? What's interesting is that when you ask the same question about opportunities to learn and grow, 44% of Gen Xers and 41% of baby boomers say the same thing. So it's not like it's isolated, that it's really that people want those opportunities to learn and grow. The other thing is that when they're in the job, 87% of millennials rate professional career growth and development opportunities as important to them. And 69% of non-millennials say the same thing. So what people are and by the way, I don't think this was always this way, but I think it's an important thing. And as you, as strengths coaches, are talking with organizations, if they are asleep to this, it's a great opportunity for you to wake them up. Development's got to be at the center of the human capital strategy inside organizations of all sizes. Development needs to be at the absolute center of the human capital strategy for organizations, because it's what it takes now to attract and retain top candidates. And as the job market changes, and by the way, we are in a dramatic change in the job market. Johnny Taylor, who's the CEO of SHRM, was in the news in the last week talking about the real issues with upskilling people and cross-skilling people inside organizations. There are a lot of people over the next decade whose jobs will be eliminated by technology, by some version of technology, will be eliminated by virtue of the changes in our economy and our workplace. And people right now, people need development. They know, they are awake to, in many cases, that they need development, and they're looking at where they can find it. And if there's opportunities to be able to find that in organizations, it's one of the things that really attracts them to being in those organizations. And so we know that that's a huge draw there. Jim, were you going to say something about this?
Yeah, Dean, sometimes when we think about learning and growing, I'm an Xer, and I kind of grew up in my career in a time when learning and growing meant going to a conference once a year. Like that was your, right. You get to go to a conference, whatever, some travel and maybe some learning. And yet I think this generation is kind of forcing us to kind of rethink this need of learning and what that means. And I think we've done some work around that. Can you talk a little bit about more than just a conference, and what are they looking for? How can we help in this area?
Yeah, I am so laughing to you. That is such an old dude thing to say. My learning is I get to go to a conference once a year. Well, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But we saw it that way, right? I mean, that was kind of
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you blush. I think I made you blush.
No, I am.
I'm an old dude too. So, but it's really true, right? What you're saying, this way it resonates for me, it made me laugh, right? Is because that's like the old kind of conception of learning, right? Mm-hmm. So learning is fundamentally changing, right? And if you think that it's one of those things that it's become a base level expectation of organizations. So this is one of the things that you see that's really different. I think that, to your point, Jim, there was a certain time where it was like development was a nice to do, right? It was sort of a way to keep people happy. You see this a lot because a lot of, and I know this as I talk with learning professionals in companies of all sizes, a lot of learning has been historically, and even still continues to be, kind of reactive. Like, oh, hey, we need to train these people. It's kind of like, hey, we need to fix them, right? Or, hey, people are restless. Let's give them a little development to make them happy. Right? As opposed to that it's integral to the business process, right? And we know that learning is really changing in a significant way. So we know that, like, one of the things that's happening in learning is now on demand. So agile organizations want learning that's flexible, that's ready to meet employee needs when they happen. And so you got to have, it's kind of like people want learning like ready to go when there's an issue or a need or somebody has something that they want to be able to do it. It feels more integrated into our work, right? So with technology, with mobile devices, learning is not something that you go do and then come back to your job. It's more integrated to how people do their job. It sounds funny, but you think about the number of times a day that you Google something, right? From, hey, what's the definition of this word? Or, hey, what does this mean? Or what's the background on this? Or, hey, is anybody talking about this, right? Or what are the latest articles on this? Or who's doing this kind of work? Just the number of, learning is now part of the way that we work. The other thing is learning is more informal. And I think this is interesting. If you do Google this, there's some cool kind of differences between formal learning and informal learning. There's been a big shift in terms of learning, that learning is more informal. The control is more in the hands of the user. It's more about relevance and to the user, the consumer of the learning, and less oriented around relevance to the organization. It's more about timing. It's more like, hey, it's just in time. It's more about, as opposed to somebody else's defining the outcome for the learning, that the user, the consumer of the learning, is saying, this is what I want to get out of it. And as a result, it's more sort of learner-centric, right? So the issues I'm having, the problems I'm having, the development needs I have, it's all what's fascinating to me is that when Malcolm Knowles, who's sort of the father of adult learning, he was the one that coined the term andragogy, right? When one of the key tenets that he talked about relative to adult learning was relevancy. And it feels like in some ways we're catching up with that all adult learning, it's sort of relevancy on steroids. One of the big things that's happening in learning right now is that learning management systems, LMS systems, which are the technology systems that run learning inside organizations, are kind of morphing into something that they're now calling learning experience platforms, right? So it's less about structured kind of learning that happens and you go take a course and you follow it in a very formal way, as opposed to a platform that you access to, and again, very, very oriented around the consumer of the learning, right? The other thing is and this is probably the biggest thing, is learning is local. So as opposed to sort of top down and organizational, employees expect feedback and coaching as part of their day-to-day experience of learning. So, if you look at our data, you look at our research, 47% of employees report having received feedback from their manager a few times a year or less often. Right? So that's nearly 50% of people are only getting feedback from their managers a couple times a year or less often than that. Right? 19% of employees receive feedback once a year or less. Holy cow. Right? I mean, just nuts, right? 1 out of 5 employees are only getting feedback from their manager once a year or less. Only 34% of employees strongly agree that their manager knows what projects or tasks that they're working on. It feels like even though learning is more learner-centric, it's more just in time, it's more informal, and it's more dynamic. The point of contact where people should be getting that learning is their manager, and for the most part, they're not getting it, right? One of the so if you look at and this I think is, sorry, I'm data heavy today, but one of the things is if you look at the gap or the need and how people are not getting development, on average, 3 in 10 employees strongly agree that there's someone at work who encourages their development. Only 30% of employees would say, hey, there's somebody at work that is helping me think about my development, right? That is the gap, by the way, for strengths coaches, right? Is helping managers to know how to work with people inside their development. What's interesting is when you double that number, when that number goes up to 6 in 10 employees that strongly agree there's someone at work that encourages their development, profitability increases by 11%, and employee retention increases by almost 30%, right? So moving the needle on that, huge impact for the organization, increase in profitability, increase in employee retention. Only 4 in 10 employees currently strongly agree they've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. And again, when you double that number, when 8 in 10 employees feel like they have opportunities at work to learn and grow, productivity increases by 16% and employee retention increases by 44%. So significant gains that can happen, but the place they should be getting it, which is managers, the person that is responsible for their work, the person that they would most likely turn to, they're not getting that from those managers. So there's a significant opportunity there, right?
Dean, we had just to go back to your local, when we think about local, more learner-centric, informal, on-demand, we made a shift in our high school program. We teach technology to high school students. And this year we've been seeing that, where we had instructor-led code training. They were disengaged in it. Many of them were doing other things during the training. This year we shifted to a complete YouTube model. So instead of defining what they learn, we defined what their outcome was. And then we let them come to the outcome based on their own learning speed. So we had mentors for them to help guide them to different resources that they could watch or things that they could do. Some of them went completely YouTube, right? They just watched YouTube videos and beat the code into submission. Some of them did it by building their own things. This year we allowed hardware for the first time. And so they got hands-on. Many of them learned in groups where they would query other groups of people and to get help in a micro sense, and then they would disperse
Yeah.
and they would go back to what they were doing. And for me, it was a real learning, as you talk about this, that it came to life for me this year is
Right.
on these Saturdays, I would watch them do all these things, local, informal,
Yeah.
more learner-centric, more on demand, more
Yeah.
just in time, right?
Right.
One of those things. So very, very key, I think, that model has been disrupted. My students are Gen Z, but they act like millennials in a lot of way. And I
Yeah.
think we're really seeing this decentralized now learning that's going on where, like you said, an experience model, right? A learning experience instead of it
Yeah.
being necessarily, here's some dictated training you have to go through, more of
Yeah.
what can we teach you where you're at right now? Yeah.
And I think to your point, right? I think it's part of building an agile culture. I'm going to say something broad and completely unsubstantiated. Okay. Here we go. Broad and totally unsubstantiated. Okay. This is just my opinion, not unsupported by research, right? I really do think that learning is becoming a core competency for employees, for people to work in the new world, right? That it moves from you do your job and then you go learn to that learning as we build more agile organizations, as we build more flexible organizations, as we build organizations that have to adapt and people that the demand for consuming information and upskilling gets greater and greater and greater. To your point, it's that being able to learn and learn quickly and integrate that learning and use that learning becomes more important. You think about one of the things, I don't know if you guys have heard this term, but active learning is one of the terms that you hear around. And active learning's been around for a while, right? But lately, all of a sudden, you hear it in organizations of all sizes. And active learning, there's an active learning institute. If you Google it, you can find it. Active learning is really an approach to learning where you, instead of people sort of learning, the kind of typical approach where people learn a concept, then they go apply a concept. It's where people learn in small groups. They're given a business challenge to use around that. They have a mentor. It's kind of like what you described, Jim. And their job is to go address it and innovate and to address it. So it's kind of like that learning on the job, but they've got the learning ecosystem around them, supporting them so they don't get stuck. Right. And what's cool about it is it feels like what they're building are knowledge and skills that's directly relevant to the work they're going to do. There's opportunity for innovation that's built in. And the work product of their learning is applicable for the business. So it's highly relevant. It's not only relevant for the learner, but it's relevant for the business, right? So,
Dean, these students that I'm talking about, they don't show up naturally. They just don't come to Gallup on Saturdays as a group by themselves and start doing these kinds of things, right? Someone had to be there. And I think as we think of all these things we've just talked about, this really then begins to speak to the importance of the manager. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. This is where so if you think about, there's this whole, that's why I wanted to talk about the landscape, right? Yeah. So you think about the whole landscape here. So the workforce is changing, learning is changing, organizations are changing. And in the middle of this all are managers, right? And they're absolutely central to this. So I think we started with the statistic, but we can't emphasize enough, managers have a disproportionate impact on employees and teams. Right. So 70% of work group engagement is directly attributed to the manager. So managers have, and it's interesting, you talk to leaders in organizations and they, in many cases, want to believe, hey, look, and they are setting the vision and the direction and the strategy for the organization. But a lot of the culture of the organization is born out of the managers. And what's interesting is the more we talk with organizations, the more leaders realize, gosh, my managers are not as strong as they need to be. They're not getting the job done. They're not as effective as they need to be. And sometimes it's, gosh, they're not hiring the right people. Sometimes they're not working with the people they've got in ways that are meaningful to be able to get up under people's development and performance and effectiveness. So it's interesting. The other thing we know is that that the quality of the manager is a deciding factor in what jobs people choose to apply for. And it's not just millennials, it's all generations. 58% of millennial job seekers say quality manager is a significant factor. 50% of Gen Xers, 60% of baby boomers say that attribute's extremely important to them. So everybody's looking and saying, hey, and it's one of the things that we had been saying for years, which is that people join companies, but they leave managers. We're the ones that coined that phrase many, many years ago, right? And it's because the manager sort of sets the tone for what the culture of your work life is going to be. In this research, we know that there are 4 things that people expect from their managers. And sometimes I just want to say, take a beat here. Sometimes people get these confused with the needs of followers in our strengths-based leadership book, right? And they're really 2 different things. So in our strengths-based leadership book, we did a survey, I think, I'm going to misquote this, but I think it was roughly of about 40,000 people. And where we came up with 4 things that we know that followers wanted from leaders. Hope, trust, compassion, and stability. Those were the 4 things that people said, hey, this is what we want from our leaders. These are what I'm about to give you are the 4 things that people want from managers. And they're different. So it's different thinking about the person that leads my organization, where the vision and the strategy and the direction of the organization is going to come from, the overall brand of the organization like that. That's different than the person who's the manager of my work group, the manager of my team that I'm working with every day. And we know, by the way, that in organizations, as they're increasingly matrixed, that I might have multiple people that I would call a manager, right? There's my manager that I report to. There's the manager that may be part of the cross-functional team I'm working on or the project team I'm working on. There's the manager that might be responsible for my benefits and compensation. Those all might be different people, right? And there's a time when that used to be the same. So there's 4 things that employees we have discovered that employees want from their manager. The first thing really is job clarity and priorities. That people really want to know, hey, what is my job? What should my priorities be? What is expected of me and what we're doing? They really want a clear sense of what are the expectations of this role. And we know that that's a foundation for engagement. We also know that's a huge need from people, is to be able to say, hey, tell me what I'm expected to do here. Tell me what you're counting on me for, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is a huge shift, is ongoing feedback and communication. The expectation is on a regular basis, I'm going to get communication and feedback from my manager and from others that help me to be able to grow. So that, and again, it's where we see learning sort of embedded in the job. I'm expecting that development is important to me and that my manager is really going to function as a coach for me and help me to be able to succeed. We know when we ask people about feedback typically overwhelmingly has a negative connotation. So it's not like, nobody ever said, yay, it's time for feedback, And yet at the same time, we all need feedback to grow, but it's got to be constructive. It's got to be developmental. It's got to be future oriented. It's got to be focused. All those kinds of feedback embedded in coaching are what makes me effective. I also need to feel like, by the way, that implicit in this is that my manager who's coaching me is accessible to me. So it's not like, hey, twice a year we sit down and talk about my progress. It's no. Like on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, my manager is accessible to me as a resource for me learning, growing, and succeeding in the work that I'm doing. Right. The third thing is accountability. That there's somebody that, and again, this is expectations, what people expect from their managers. There's an expectation relative to accountability that there's somebody that is helping me review my progress, will recognize my successes, and more than that, will help me discuss what's working and not working and apply that learning to the work that I'm doing. So again, it's like when you look at these, right? When you look at job clarity and priorities, ongoing feedback and communication, accountability, you can see this is all inside of opportunities to learn and grow. It's all about how now learning is sort of baked into the job. right? And so managers, there's this conception that a manager is the person that tells you what to do and judges whether you did it or not, right? That's an old characterization. Managers just aren't that anymore. Managers now in future focused organizations, managers are coaches that have a developmental bent to everything that they're doing. They clarify expectations, they provide coaching on a regular basis, and they provide a structure for distilling learning. It's a structure of accountability, but it's not accountability like you're good, you're bad. You get a raise, you don't get a raise. It's a structure of accountability like, here's where you've made progress, here's what you've accomplished, here's how we extract the learning and make you better for the next time. Here's how we recognize your success, right? So that's the conception. And again, all of us have had good managers in our careers, or hopefully we've all had good managers. There's somebody we can point to and say, man, that manager was great. We've all had bad managers in our careers. And oftentimes more bad managers than good, right? So, but it's important to sort of distinguish what is it that people want from managers, and what do great managers look like, right? I want to talk in a minute about what great managers do specifically to help people grow, right? And what are the things that you would have managers do? So as you're coaching managers, what are the things you want to coach them to do? Before I do that, I want to talk about, I want to say something that's probably a little semi-controversial, okay? And so I think, and I want to say it because as we've worked with organizations who employ strengths coaches, either inside the organization or that are outside of the organization, I see this a lot where the coach themselves is confused about how they should insert themselves in the organization, right? Or where's the best return on investment in the work that they do? We would say that for the most part, the best place for strengths coaches to be deployed in an organization is with managers. That in fact, for an employee and not really individual contributors, really that the highest impact a strengths coach can have in an organization is to be working with managers and leaders inside that organization. And so there are some strengths coaches, and I know a number of really excellent ones, who just work exclusively with executive leaders. That's really their focus. They really work on leadership development. I would say the majority of strengths coaches, in many cases, are working inside organizations, want to and should deploy themselves to really be attached to managers, helping managers to be successful in their role. The best, and again, this is sort of controversial, but the best coach for an individual employee, for an individual contributor in an organization, is their manager. The best place that, if I'm an employee in an organization, the best place I can get coaching is from my manager. Why is that? Because my manager is closest to the action. So as they're giving me coaching, it's tied directly to my development and to my performance. Right. And we know part of great feedback is timely. And so as I'm performing, that my manager is right there giving me feedback, giving me coaching that helps me develop and helps me perform. And what happens when you see this in some organizations where strengths coaches get in them, what happens is they go to work with people inside organizations, and sometimes they get tangled up in the relationship between an employee and their manager, right? So they start to insert themselves in that relationship, and they're doing translating. And by the way, in 99% of the cases, it's well-meaning, right? This is not typically malicious inserting themselves. It's well-meaning inserting themselves. But what they've done is they've inserted themselves between the employee and their manager in a way that's not helpful, right? So what we would coach effective strengths coaches to do is to really focus on how can I empower those managers to be successful in their role? Because it'll have this huge impact on the success of the work group and by extension, the success of the organization.
Dean, can you separate that a little bit from, we have these strengths discovery days, and we have these opportunities for people to learn about their strengths and who they are. And I think some people see that as coaching, and I'm not saying it's not, but
Yeah.
When you think about, you say, hey, your most effective role as a coach is to go in and train managers to how to coach their employees. What's the role of going in and maybe these discovery days or these seminars where people, learn their top 5? Can you differentiate that? Because I think that's confusing for some.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And thank you for asking that question. It's a great question. One of the things that we know, like if you talk to our friends over at ICF, the International Coach Federation, and you look at their competencies for coaching, one of the things that you see for the most part is the narrow, rigorous description of coaching is I'm working with you one-on-one over time around your development. So if you look at all their competencies, they're all sort of oriented around, Jim is my coach. I'm working with Jim. We have sessions on a regular basis. And all of those competencies are sort of structured around that. What we know in practice is most strengths coaches, that's one aspect of the role that they do. And particularly if they work inside organizations, right? It's one aspect, but it's not the only aspect of the work that they do. So another aspect of the work oftentimes is education. So they focus more like a trainer or a course leader, right? So they're doing educational work inside the organization. And I will tell you, a lot of introducing strengths to teams, to organizations is building up a critical mass of understanding and education in the organization. So everybody's sort of in the world of strengths, knows what they're talking about, understands the themes, can start to traffic in this. Another aspect that strengths coaches are often asked to do is be a champion inside organizations. So to be a cheerleader, to do kind of promotional stuff, to do a lot of information sessions. So it's sort of quasi-educational, but it's more sort of promotional, right? Another thing that you see that strengths coaches are asked to do is be a consultant. So sometimes it's not so much that one-on-one developmental conversations that are driven by a lot of great questions and a lot of listening. Sometimes they're sitting down and they're consulting around strengths with people, saying, look, this is really the best direction for you in terms of how you apply your talents in a particular situation, maybe with a leader, maybe with a manager. So to your point, Jim, just to kind of unpack it a little bit, there's sort of a variety of things that coaches are asked to be able to do inside of an organization. And I think that it's one of the things where I think and all those things are valid and good and useful. They do require, I will tell you, as I work with coaches, coaches tend to be more disposed to one than all of them, right? You very rarely do you find a coach who is great at all of those things. They tend to be like really, really good one-on-one developmentally and not so great in front of the room. Or they're great in front of the room, but they're not really a very good listener. You know what I mean? And, they're a little too much of a consultant and not enough of a coach, right? So there's all the flavors, right? And that's all good and not necessarily a bad thing. But we would say at some point inside organizations let me just give you a specific example around this. I want to get this last piece here before we wrap today. But so I was having conversations with a very large enterprise organizations here in the US, right? And I was talking to the folks that were head of their human capital processes and the person who's head of their learning and development function, right? And they had certified a bunch of coaches inside the organization. But those coaches were sort of figuring out how do we deploy ourselves in the organization. And there was some confusion around it. And as a result, what you could see is that for many of those coaches, they were trying to figure out, how do I be most effective? How do I apply myself in a way that's most leveraged? And in some cases, they were succeeding. In a lot of cases, they were failing because one is if you act like you're going to do strengths coaching with every single person individually, it's an insurmountable task. You just can't do it, right? And so if you think about inside organizations, how are we deploying coaches against the manager population? It becomes much more manageable, much more quickly. It also becomes a way that your application of coaches to the population of the organization becomes more leveraged, right? And so you're more likely to have a big impact. So, make sense?
I know, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, that's good. The last thing I want to just talk about this piece, and then maybe we can take a couple of questions, right? So, um, here's what, as your coaching managers, here's some, not all, but here's some of the things that I would be coaching managers around if I were you. And these are based on on those four things that I mentioned before that people want from their managers. So the four things, I think somebody in the chat said, hey, what were those four things again? The four things are job clarity and priorities, ongoing feedback and communication, accountability, and then opportunities to learn and grow. And if you look at the first three, job clarity and priorities, ongoing feedback and communication, and accountability, they like if you were going to tie a bow on them, the bow would be called opportunities to learn and grow, which is the fourth one, right? And if you're familiar at all with our performance development work, we talk about kind of the three essential elements as being able to clarify expectations, provide continual coaching, and then have a structure, create accountability, right? So these are some of the things that as a strengths coach and as you work with managers, I would focus on. Okay. One is to help managers have a clear picture of expectations and excellence for each role that they manage and be able to communicate that. In a lot of cases, managers are not clear. It sounds weird to say, but for the people they manage, they're not 100% clear what's expected of people in this role. What are the job expectations? And by the way, job expectations don't change by the person or by their strengths, right? There's a common sense. We expect people that have this role in our organization. There's a shared set of job expectations. This is the results. These are the outcomes we expect you to be able to produce, right? Now, how somebody uses their strengths to produce those outcomes will be different, uniquely different for each person. But there's a shared set of expectations. And it's important that the manager can say, here's what we expect of people in that role. The other piece is they should have some sense of what does excellence look like for the role. So if you ask people, and it's funny, like try doing this experiment because it's an interesting experiment. A lot of times when you ask people, you ask managers, what does excellence look like for a role? They tell you what the expectations are, and it's kind of like, do more of those things. They don't have a sort of a qualitative range to say, hey, look, this is what we expect of people, right? This is what success looks like in the role. And let me tell you what excellence looks like and how it's differentiated. But when you have somebody who's an A player, when you have somebody who's really excellent in the role, man, you can really point to that person and say, man, that person's markedly different. So it's getting clear, helping them to get clear, what do I expect of people and what does excellence look like? And then communicate it, right? So we know this is a fundamental for engagement for individuals and the team, right? Is that that expectations have been clarified. I'm clear about what's wanted and needed of me, what's expected of me in the role. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that they've built a relationship with the people they manage so that those people are known and cared for. Those people are in a job that fits and they have what they need to succeed, right? So we know that if you're related to people, you've built a relationship where people feel known, they experience being known, they experience being cared for, right? And they are in a job that fits their unique strengths and talents, and they have what they need to succeed. They're more likely to be engaged and they're more likely to be successful. This is the basis for the thing that we know that great managers do, which is individualization. I don't mean the talent theme individualization, right? I mean the task individualization, right? So sometimes when we talk about that managers individualize, people get it all wrapped up in the talent theme individualization. That's not what we mean. Individualization is a task that managers do or an approach that managers use in the way they manage. And that is, they know how to shape the job around the individual, right? That they know the individual uniquely. That experience, and usually a good sign of that is that person feels known and cared for. They know how to shape the role and the approach to the role around that person, and they have what they need to succeed. So we know that ability of managers to individualize is super important. Right. And we talk about that a lot. And by the way, it's embedded in a lot of our manager education. The third thing is that they can that managers coach and provide feedback on an ongoing basis. So part of it is helping managers to be accessible and approachable. Do your folks. We did some research. This is a few years now. This is like maybe 5 years ago. Some research, and one of the things is it actually the frequency with which people met with people wasn't as important as did the individuals have a perception that their manager was accessible if you needed them, right? And we know everybody needs different touch points at a different cadence, but are managers making themselves accessible and approachable? Are they providing that kind of individualized coaching and feedback? And is it constructive, right? So this is one of the pieces I mentioned earlier that oftentimes feedback comes across as negative and the connotation is negative. Are they able to provide coaching and feedback that's strengths-based and constructive? It's interesting, like in some of our data, 16% of employees report that somebody took an interest in developing their strengths in the past week, right? That's less than 1 in 5 people report that someone took an interest in developing their strengths, right? This is why strengths-based education for managers is so important. It's why a strengths-based approach is so important. The fourth thing that you can coach managers to do is to provide accountability, to recognize people's successes, to talk about their successes with them, and talk about what's working, what's not working, and how that then gets applied, right, to what's next. And do it in a way that's specific and future focused. I love the Marshall Goldsmith stuff about feed forward, right? As opposed to feedback. Feedback is deconstructing what didn't work, right, in the past. Feed forward is how can we take what we're learning and apply it to what's next, right? Super important. And I think one of the things that we see that great managers do is they create coaching moments. They create learning moments in the work that they do. And these don't have to be heavy things. We talk oftentimes about managers having quick connects with people. They're short kind of bursts where they're creating a coaching moment with people. The other thing that I think is useful is to help managers, and many managers may not be disposed to this, to have a developmental mindset, to know that human beings are not like chairs. They're not static, that human beings are more like a plant. They're growing all the time, right? That I think, it's an interesting thing. Somebody said to me once, the challenge with growing adults is you don't get the same visual cues as you do when you work with growing children, right? With children, when you're teaching children, that you get visual cues, right? They get bigger. Their dexterity improves, right? Their structural ability changes, right? With adults, you don't get the same visual cues, right? So it's harder to see, right? But we got to remember, and sometimes we forget, it's like, no, Jim is not like a chair, right? It's not, no, he's growing all the time, and we don't walk up, if I haven't seen you for a month, we don't walk up and go, man, you're different, right? But you are, right? Because you've had a month of experiences and a month of growing, right? So it's important, this is the Carol Dweck stuff, right, around mindsets. It's important to have kind of a growth or a developmental mindset when you're working with people, is like, hey, they're growing all the time. And it's important to have that in mind. So with that, why don't we park it here, Jim? I don't know if we've got time for questions or not, if I just ran it right up to the end here.
No, we have for a few quick questions while I'm waiting for those to come in the chat room. Dean, we have a new course, Boss to Coach. Yeah. And really kind of designed for managers to take them from this to coaching. As a coach, what would be the benefit of attending a course like that? I mean, thinking through the lens of a coach helping managers, what would be the benefit of attending a course like that?
Yeah, I will tell you, this is just me being real direct, which I'm notorious for, right? But sometimes we have strengths coaches who come do our manager education, right? It's most useful if they're actually managers themselves or have been managers, right? Sometimes they come and it's kind of like taking a plumbing course if you're not a plumber, right? And haven't ever had to deal with plumbing issues, right? When you're in that course, if you're not in the midst of it, it gets pretty conceptual pretty fast, right? It feels like a concept versus no, I got somebody I'm dealing with next Tuesday, right? And I got to deal with here, right? So I honestly don't, unless those strengths coaches or managers, I don't necessarily recommend that they do it, right? Because they certainly could. There's nothing stopping them. We have the course that's our flagship course that we recommend everybody take first is called Leading High Performance Teams. That is a very useful course in that it talks about really like what are the characteristics of somebody who's a great manager. We talk about it as being strengths-based, engagement-focused, and performance-oriented. And really understanding those are the three kind of characteristics of being a great manager. And then moving from boss to coach is a course that's designed to build on that. So it talks about, okay, well, given that, how do you actually do that? And it's moving from boss to coach is a very practical course. And again, if you've got a burning desire to take this course, you should take these courses. I don't want to dissuade anybody from doing it, particularly if you are a manager or you've been a manager, or if you are working with managers on a regular basis and want really to make sure you're in their world. You just have to know the course is designed for people managers who are in the role right now, right? That's what it's designed for. It's not designed for coaches, right?
Okay. No, it's good clarification. We're going to be talking more about that. That will be more visible in our It's the Manager. By the way, itsthemanager.com is your way to get to those resources and materials available today from a resource standpoint. So we have some videos for you. You can get signed up for a newsletter. We're going to kind of work you through this until we come up to the May release date, but itsthemanager.com if you want to get signed up. Dean, it's no coincidence. The best 3 or 4 years of my career as a manager have been in the last 3 or 4 years. The most coaching I've ever gotten indirectly, like I don't know if anybody's ever realized this, but you and Micah and Mike and Heather and Jeremy, and we think about, I have literally sat in on hundreds of hours of coaching, right?
Yeah.
Indirectly, because it wasn't, I didn't pay for this or sign up for this. I didn't even know it was going to be a result. And I've watched my own management style kind of change and grow and develop. And in the last 3 years have been high recognition years where the organization has recognized me for a lot of the work I've done. We didn't really kind of put that together until just now, like, oh yeah, if you have a great coach, you do good work, right?
Yeah.
And so
everybody needs a coach.
I'll say, Dean, I'll say thanks to you. You've been a big part of that in teaching me. And during these sessions, I tell people all the time, if you're not listening to these, you are missing out on some of the best materials that we have. And so, thanks to you, but it is one of those proofs in the pudding, and my management has gotten better in the things we're doing, and the tangible results of that have been very visible recognition. And so pretty fun to see that. No coincidence that happens. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you.
I think why don't you put a bow on this here? I think we don't have any questions in the chat room, and we're close to our time. So tie it up for us.
I will. Andrea has a question that I'm going to answer two quick questions. One is the Gen Z data just got released. Okay. And I don't know if it's been released publicly or not, but we'll figure out how to make it available. Right. But the Gen Z, our prospective paper on Gen Z just got released. Super interesting stuff. Right. And different and interesting stuff. Right. And different. Andrea, she asked the question, how are organizations changing their manager's span of responsibility or span of control relative to this? What you see organizations getting, rather than span of control, organizations are getting flatter and more matrixed. Right. And more dynamic as a result of that. And that's probably a whole nother hour in and of itself in how that's changing and what that means around this. Right. I think here's the bow, Jim, and then I'll stop here. I think it's important for strengths coaches and the work that you do. This is going to be a great year for you to get super interested in managers, who they are, the role, their function in the organization, their impact in the organization, and what characterizes great management. And I think it's a great year to go to school on this, because if you really care about changing human development, if you really care about shifting the culture of organizations, the place that you go to work is with managers.
All right. Sounds good. We will remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments. Anything in here, a question you didn't get answered, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We'll get right back to you. You want to catch a recorded audio, video of this program as well as all the past ones. I talked about all the hours that I've done, 600 plus hours I've done around coaching over the last 5 years. Available off of our coaches blog, available for you, coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, Dean also mentioned our Boss to Coach course. That's all listed on our courses site. If you go to courses.gallup.com, follow the prompts through that. There's the availability, where they're at, how much they are, how much time they take, the pre-requirements, all those things are listed on that page. Again, that's courses.gallup.com. Just a reminder, the 2019 CliftonStrengths Summit is coming up. Dean will be there, and I'm sure speaking a few times there as well. If you want to come back and hear him interact and meet him in person, come to the summit June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. If you want to get more information on that, head out to CliftonStrengthsSummit.com, and I'd get registered today, March 15th. We see a little price increase, and the best prices are right now. Join us live on our Facebook group if you want to do that. Lots of great conversation going on there as well. Facebook.com/groups/called to coach. We'll look forward to the next Called to Coach. It's coming up. Thank you for joining us today. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.